are literally shaping the planet.
Purpose is the only pathway to a regenerative future.
We have a choice to stay with the status quo or to change.
What is the point of trying to be just resilient when we can actually innovate?
Good afternoon or good morning to those of you stateside, or good evening to those of you further to my east. Brian's done a wonderful introduction already. I won't repeat that, but I will say thank you for joining the talk and for giving me 30 minutes of your time to talk about how we embrace technology to build back better. I'm going to start here before you all switch off with holiday snaps and, oh, seriously, there is a purpose to it. Please don't turn off. I was thinking back to my last speaking event of this sort of magnitude and nature. And this here on screen is Melbourne in November 2019, a more innocent and happier time where the industry felt full of promise and you could stand within 2 meters distance of someone else without fear or trepidation, which you can see from those pickies there. This was the World Engineering Convention, which for those of you that haven't heard of it, it's a bit like the Olympic Games, but for the engineering and construction industry. It only happens every 4 years. You have to bid in order to host the World Engineering Convention. And at the start and the end of the event, they kind of pass over the baton, a bit like they do the Olympic torch. So it's got some kind of good legacy around it. And at the conference, we were really talking about change, transformation, and believing in a better way. And we used this slide as part of the deck around how, when it happens, change really comes at an industry fast. And the context and the reason why Mr. Jobs is on the screen is prior to construction, I worked in sort of music and entertainment industry for 7 years. And I watched that industry get completely transformed by the internet and then at one point, Steve Jobs himself. And the point here comes, it's from an Ernest Hemingway quote when asked about how it was that how he went bankrupt. And he says, well, actually, it happened in 2 ways. First, gradually, and then suddenly. And boy, oh boy, have we had our suddenly moment for 2020. Slam on the brakes, right? And an inflection point of the size and scale that none of us will have experienced in our careers. And hopefully we'll never have to again in terms of this magnitude. And today, you know, the purpose of the talk and what we'd like to share with you guys is we want to talk about how, in response to the sudden impact of COVID-19 pandemic, how we can not just accelerate digital transformation, but harness it to create a better, fairer built environment that delivers better outcomes for all. And I best always have to start here, right? So when talking of COVID-19, it's really important to recognize the global humanitarian challenge around this. Primary importance to all of us, without a doubt, is safeguarding lives, health and well-being of everybody on the planet. But we do have to move past that, and we do need to consider the economic shock and also the ways and means in which we can prepare and get back to work safely, effectively, and as we'll talk about in the next 20 minutes, hopefully in a better way. And just thinking about how the sudden impact of COVID-19 has affected the industry and looking specifically at our experiences as Mace, you know, no event has ever exposed the fragility of the construction industry quite so clearly as what happened to us through kind of Q1 and in part Q2 of 2020. And we sort of talk about it in these 3 primary areas. So the impact upon the workforce, the understanding of people on our projects and sites, you know, who are they? Where are they? What are they doing? You know, we have safety systems, we have method statements, we have plans and mitigations for pretty much everything, but not a pandemic, right? So how can we get control around the workforce and protect them in terms of safety? Supply chain was a huge area of risk, and it really exposed the fragility and also lack of control around the supply chains that we operate. Where are our materials? What are the risks in terms of imports and exports when they start closing borders? what happens because the factories are closed and actually we don't have any material being produced at source. There's no visibility of stockpiles. There's no visibility of labour. You know, massive risks and problems for us as an industry running projects. And then thirdly, the environment. So we always talk about construction as being an uncontrolled environment. But the labour intensive nature of our industry presented a huge problem. You know, there's a lot of people working in not a lot of space. So how do you manage things such as canteens, drying rooms, stairwells, hoists, you know, all big problems that needed to be overcome. Here in the UK, where Mace operates kind of 90% of its construction activity, we're a consultant globally, but here in the UK, we are predominantly a general contractor in your terms, and we also complete construction services broadly across Europe. We're not really a GC outside of the UK and Europe. So focusing predominantly on London for a minute, where 90% of our activity takes place. COVID-19 really kicked off 17 March, and by the 26th of March, we had gone from, we had 50,000 operatives on our projects and sites at the start of March. On the 26th of March, we had 1,000. You know, there was a significant stop and halt in all activity. In line with lockdown measures and to ensure that we could get enough control around those three things that I referenced previously, we closed all of our sites for 2 to 3 weeks, apart from where essential work needed to carry on, in order to take stock and really understand what it was that we needed to do to both help suppress the virus and protect our people. And then we started a gradual reopening, you know, getting the sites back up and running, getting people back to work, thinking about that kind of economic recovery as such. And it was difficult. It was really difficult, and it still proves difficult today. It's really hard to change people's behaviours. And in essence, what we are now trying to do in a labour-intensive industry is to change the behaviours of how people work and to be more responsible. And I guess that's best reflected in terms of the difficulty of changing behaviours in society, right? So you look at, certainly you take a walk around the streets of London today, and we continue to prove that we have a somewhat diverse approach to social distancing and whether or how we should wear a mask that covers your nose, mouth, chin, or maybe not one at all, right? So behaviour change is hard. And we kind of proved it. We were on the front page of the news at the end of March. That was one of our projects down in Battersea, where they captured some aerial footage of some people that were not following the social distancing rules that we had very clearly set out for everybody on numerous occasions, and at pretty much any opportunity on that site where there was a board or a place to put a sign. That was fun. We were a topic of conversation on our Good Morning TV here, is hosted by a rather challenging chap called Piers Morgan, who was calling us out on national TV. Not helpful, but luckily we managed to keep our initial Mace response behind closed doors on that one, and we managed to get a bit more structure, and slowly and surely we have started to recover and return to scale. And in terms of that recovery, it was really helped and supported by a huge amount of data. Our digital transformation during the period of March, April and May went great guns. I really love that cartoon of the sort of quote of, you know, what was it that finally allowed for your digital transformation success? CEO, CIO, CTO, COVID-19, tick. You know, the pace and the ability to get data and transparency was really important. We were facing challenges. We had fewer workers on site. We had difficulty getting materials and specialist suppliers to site. And a lot of the places that we would normally go to get supplies and products were still closed. Some tasks were taking longer than usual because of social distancing, and some tasks we just couldn't complete at all, right? It's very difficult to be installing lifts in shafts and keeping a 2 metre social distance when you've only got a sort of 2.5 metre sort of, what do we call it, enclosure at best. But get back to work we did, and the productivity metrics started to come back in. And we got some interesting facts, right? So we've got 50% of the workforce on site, but we're only 30% down in terms of the output that we're sort of generating. And also statements like, you know, with the better productivity that I've got on my site at present and the new ways of going about work, I reckon we probably only need 7.5 people for every 10 that we used to have on sites. And it's like, well, what's going on here then, right? Where are these efficiencies coming from? Because we're meant to be in a position that's, you know, been somewhat hampered and delayed by the pandemic. And actually, looking at these efficiencies, how is it that I start to bank them across our business, right? How do we build on that as a successful point? And it comes back to these 3 areas, really, and the sorts of things that we were doing differently as a result of the pandemic that we really need to double down on. You know, we've seen a better way of working, we've proven a better way of working, and we now need to sort of make that business as usual. Workforce is very akin to the conversation that was just happening there with the panel, right? Better real-time transparency and therefore control of our workforce than we've ever had before allowed us to make those sort of marginal gains that improve productivity. And also less people on site meant there was less people to get in the way, right? Our teams were just more efficient and more effective as they went on. From a supply chain perspective, again, transparency was really important, visibility and better control of the workforce and the supplies and the materials and what was coming to site and when. We were also more open and collaborative with our supply chain. You know, we're both in kind of panic and recovery mode. So therefore that broke a lot of those kind of contractual problems that might get in the way normally. And lo and behold, better integration of supply chain equals better outcomes. And we'll come back to that in a minute. And then thirdly, you know, the environment. And I hope I'm not sort of, well, I hope I am kind of preaching to the converted here in some respects. As we've proven often, moving work off-site into a controlled environment improves safety, improves quality, and increases productivity. So as a result of COVID-19, we had to look at how can we take work away from the site where it's difficult to control and do more of it off-site. And lo and behold, we've got a number of new case studies around how actually that's more effective and efficient. And I think today, just to come back to the sort of purpose of the summit and the talk, it's really about technology as well. And technology played a huge part, not just in allowing us to keep our sites open and operational and create the data and visibility, but to also, I guess, approach things in a different way. I'll just take through a few examples. This is one example where the acceleration of digital adoption in the pandemic kind of really kicked off for us. So site cameras are probably fairly common to us all, but with our partner Lobster, surveying and sort of keeping eye on progress on site has proven really valuable. We work with a great startup here in the UK called Disperse. We were using technology to provide greater visibility of site progress to people's homes. So one person on site with a 360 camera in half a day can go and survey the site. That gives 30, 40, 60 people access to that project for weekly progress reports from their home. So we continued to develop detailed program updates and drop lines. We continued to complete valuations and pay invoices based on actual work completed in terms of what was happening on site. We continue to be able to collaborate with our supply chain on progress and work activity planning. And we're also able to keep clients and professional teams up to speed with what was happening on site without them needing to sort of come to site and therefore maintain lockdown guidance, etc. This one's been really important. So we've also used this as an opportunity to pilot some technology that we had been eyeing for a period of time. A Australian company called Wynomia that works on the physical tagging and tracking of elements. So on one of our projects that we'll talk about in a bit, where we're building high-rise residential in a very different industrialized way, we've now been able to digitize the progress of the elements that we're using to build that building with. And it's removed a combined sort of 5 days effort which ran across 4 different people to report weekly on progress entirely by adding technology and providing visibility and reporting in real time. And then lastly, a new project that we have just commenced with a number of our supply chain partners here in the UK to build the command control room to win and destroy all other command and control rooms using open sort of APIs, integration of data, and a really sort of nice interactive immersive way of viewing and engaging with that data. Again, just to provide people with the visibility and transparency of what's happening on those projects out there where we need to restrict and protect as best as we possibly can. And I guess that's a common theme for us. You know, across the globe, our people have been really embracing, adopting and deploying technology where possible for a number of years at Mace. And we've got a huge amount of great productivity improvements, great stats, always great feedback from our teams that work on it. You know, it is people that drive this change. But I think there is a sort of greater challenge coming down the track, really. So while we are making amazing strides with all of those companies that we've just talked about and as demonstrated on the screen, the question that we need to ask ourselves in these sorts of forums is, are we really shifting the dial as quickly and effectively as we need to? You know, are we executing on that Shadow Summit ambition for innovation to save the planet? And the answer is probably no. There's 3 broad challenges around that, I think, just to sort of summarize where we're positioning currently. Firstly, scale. So as an industry, and you know, I'm holding the mirror up here as well, we're great at trials, pilots, prototypes, one-offs, but we really need to get enterprise grade with our technology pretty quickly. And that doesn't mean falling back on the kind of big incumbent lazy enterprise tech that, you know, we could list, but I won't name any names. But, you know, how do we integrate all these wonderful point solutions so that it becomes a kind of standard business as usual operations? And that's a really important shift for us quite quickly. That leads you on to pace. I mean, you know, we don't need to talk about this in too much detail, but for any of you that have tried to work through a procurement process of getting technology onto a project with a legal team, with a set of 8 stakeholders that you need to convince and commit, you'll know what I'm saying about this. We're not quick enough. And then lastly, purpose. And this is where we really jump off into the final 10 minutes, right? The big call to arms for today. Are we even pointed at the right things? You know, the things that society really needs at this point in time. And I'm going to pick up my pace here because I've got a lot of slides and not a lot of time. And I want to ensure that we talk about these kind of key messages here. And when we talk about purpose, there's a really clear definition, right? We're doing a lot of technology to do things better. I've said efficiency probably 6 times in this presentation already today. But it's not just about efficiency. We need to be thinking about doing better things, because we are at a point of disruption for our industry, and it's not coming from digital, and it's not coming from the pandemic. It's coming from the climate emergency. You'll know this stat: 37% of total global carbon emissions comes from concrete. 37% from the built environment. 8% of it comes from concrete. If cement was a country, it would be the 3rd biggest contributor of carbon emissions in the world, behind China and the USA. That's bananas. We've got massive problems around refrigerant gases. Worldwide, there's 1.6 billion air conditioning units in use. By 2050, urbanization and the increase in temperature means there's likely to be 5 billion. That's a bit of a vicious cycle, because the more energy we use, the hotter it gets, and so on and so on and so on. And there's plenty of other examples, right? And I won't go through the stats, and hopefully again, you guys and girls understand where we're at from a built environment perspective. There's loads of data, there's loads of science. We're all geeks in some respects. Those big facts are very clear and somewhat frightening. And we know that to tackle climate change at this sort of scale does involve policy, it does involve governmental change. There's now written in law across the world many commitments, not just to things such as Paris COP21, but the 2050 net zero commitments, which is starting to drive change. But what do we do to make that happen? And at Mace, we're advocating change through all of our people. And when we're out talking to people like yourselves, we're also advocating that same change and taking that ownership. And I'll just tell you a story really quickly about this guy here. This is Scott Baker. He's an electrical engineer on one of our biggest construction projects in the UK, Battersea Power Station. So Scott's at home one Saturday morning and he's in his garage and he's just tinkering about with some lights that he's got from a project. And his daughter, Rose, who's 9, walks in and says to him, "Dad, why are you unwrapping all of those bits of plastic and then chucking it in the bin? That's not very good for the environment, is it?" And he's like, "No, Rose, no, actually, it's not." So Scott's sat there later that afternoon pondering that point that his daughter has made to him, and he gets to thinking, right? Each and every light fitting that he's buying is being delivered to site in a box wrapped in plastic. And in fact, he's employing someone on that project to be removing the light fitting from the box, taking it out the plastic, throwing the plastic in the bin, and giving the light fitting to the person that's installing it. What a crap job that is, right? On Scott's last job, which was the biggest and greenest corporate HQ in London at the time, 2018, that would have finished, there were 98,000 light fittings. You know, he's generating a lot of waste, a lot of plastic. So on the Monday morning, after his daughter makes that point, he calls all of his suppliers and he says, "I'm going to set you a challenge. I want you to remove all single-use plastic from my current job that I'm procuring, Battersea Power Station." A week later, he gets all of those suppliers in a room and everyone says, "Do you know what, Scott? Yeah, sure, we can do that. But there is a risk involved and that risk needs to be yours if they come to site damaged." Scott's like, "Yeah, okay, I feel that's a risk worth taking." I mean, he talks to them about it. Some of them have got some good ideas about wrapping stuff in paper, etc. instead. He's like, yeah, I'll take that risk, totally fine. And the results have proven Scott right? He's made a great choice. So in 2019, that action by Scott and that question from his daughter prevented the generation of 16 million single-use plastic bags on our Battersea Power Station project. Oh, sorry, across our construction projects in the UK. You see, the suppliers woke up to the fact that it wasn't just Battersea Power Station that didn't need those single-use plastic bags, it was all of their projects. So they removed them from everything they supply. And where it's absolutely required, they are now tying cables or protecting areas in recycled paper. So, you know, it's an amazing story. And the interesting point about it is that it doesn't just make sense environmentally, it also makes sense financially. You know, Scott's choice saved money, it saved the client money, it saved Mace money, it saved the supplier loads of money, and it increased our productivity. We reduced manual tasks. With that man unzipping the bags is now doing a more rewarding and valuable job. And we didn't have to pay to be sustainable, it paid to be sustainable. This is a recent report by Arup. It's available online, and this for me really encapsulates the opportunity that we all have working in the built environment. And this is why I love working in the construction industry. So for a pretty minor adjustment to a large office building, to reduce the carbon footprint of that building by 1% or 100 tons, which could be a decision that you make in your design, the optimization of your design, the choice of materiality, a better way to engineer and improve the structure, or how you build things, you know, be it through use of renewable energy, etc., in terms of your site prelims. Could be anything. There's a whole world of stuff that you could choose. But by making that decision and making that choice, you would have the same positive impact on the environment as not taking 100 flights or committing to veganism for 50 years, or walking absolutely everywhere for 33 years. And it's not to say that you shouldn't do those things. If that's your bag, then you absolutely should. We all need to be making as positive an impact as possible. But just don't forget what you can influence and what you can do if you choose to make that commitment to help technology to build back better. And we're in an interesting time here. You know, going back to November 2019 and Melbourne, it was still up for debate. You know, there was as much climate denial, particularly coming out of the US, as there was declaration of emergency. And Australia got it. They'd just been through a horrific summer with the bushfires, which decimated swathes of that country. And, you know, sadly, again, the horrible humanitarian impact of what's happening on the west coast of America at the minute. But that horrific impact, matched with the chance of doing something kind of positive and commensurate with the scale of the problem, has now become a huge amount clearer for us. The global oil industry is in a complete tailspin. The demand has disappeared as a result of COVID-19. Prices have collapsed. Profits are shrinking. The big oil companies, the BPs, the Chevrons, the Shells, are taking billions of dollars in losses and cutting tens of thousands of jobs. And they are pivoting fast to a cleaner, greener, and more conscious kind of climate response. And we, as sort of demonstrated earlier, have a similar opportunity. Our industry accounts for 37% of those total carbon emissions. So what do we need to do to ensure that we are building back better? And how do we embrace not just technology, but people in order to ensure that we do that effectively and that we do it now? And I'll leave it there. Well, actually, I'll just make one more point, actually. And this is where we really sort of come back to people. There's two types of people. And at Mace, we were founded in pursuit of a better way. And today we encourage all of our people to believe in a better way, right? You have to believe that you can make the impossible possible. And that's certainly, for the people like Scott in our organisation, what gets people out of bed each and every morning. All right. Thanks, Brian. That's me.
Matt, that was great. Thank you so much for that presentation. If you have a few minutes, we've actually got a little bit of a break before our next presentation. And you had a few questions that were popping up. So okay. If you want to go ahead and answer those, I can read them to you so you're not trying to read and process a question at the same time.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, cool. So the first one is, in what specific way did COVID do a better job at driving digital transformation than your CEO, CIO, or CTO?
It forced everybody's hand, right? So, you know, the Microsoft Teams, we had a 18-month program for rollout and adoption plans, and pre-COVID-19. And the likelihood is that it probably would have taken 18 months because it's an optional thing for people. They can opt in or out. And I think I saw somebody, I think the chap from Schneider this morning said the same thing, right? The status quo is always easier. All right, I don't need to change. I won't bother with that. All of a sudden, you can't go to your place of work anymore and everybody's making Teams calls. You have no choice, right? So it was the forced hand. And thank God, like, you know, we were ready for it. I know not all organizations had the same sort of seamless flow, but we're really benefiting as a result. And
yeah, it's almost a shame that sometimes you see humans are reactive instead of proactive to so many major things that we see coming. We know they're coming, but it's not really until we get smacked in the face that we actually do anything about it. And maybe we just enjoy the suffering and the pain we create for ourselves. But it would be nice to see people with a little bit more of a forward look sometimes on certain issues.
Yeah, I mean, you've always got the few kind of converts and such, right? Like we always focus on the top right quartile, but unfortunately, moving the middle is a really difficult part for change. This time, there was no choice.
Yeah. All right. This next one's a little bit of a loaded question, so brace yourself for it. But the question is, what if doing better things means no more new buildings? So how ready are you to reinvent Mace away from being a purveyor of concrete?
Yeah, very ready actually. We actively promote to our clients that they shouldn't be building things that they don't need. And we very regularly challenge and try and use data to challenge actually the theses behind what the sort of business case or model is in the first place. We're doing a lot. We talk about construction to production. I didn't really go into it today, but the servitization of buildings. I mean, Mace has already got an FM business as part of its offer. So we've got other ways to make money other than building things. And there's a huge amount of value, untapped value in the operation of assets. I think we all kind of recognize and know that.
Oh, that's great. So anything else you wanted to share with the audience? Thank you for that time. That was an awesome presentation. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to share with us and give us your insights.
Yeah, nothing more to share. Just again, thanks for everybody to coming along. I can't go to the panel bit. I missed it in my diary and I'm off out to see a band before we all get locked down again. But I'll be on the Slack channel tomorrow. So if anybody's got any questions or anything, then I'd be happy to kind of follow up from there.